Hello students, welcome to MOOC Political Economy. The topic for our discussion today is welfarism. We know that when liberalism arrived in the European theatre with its promise of freedom, everyone lapped it up almost like parched land does with rain, because they had been tormented by and large by the heavy hand of feudalism for generations. So liberalism offered them an opportunity to deal with their own lives on their own terms. However, one must be conscious that liberalism does not operate in a level playing field. Not everybody is equally poised to take advantage of the opportunities unleashed by liberalism. And that is why, inevitably, the problem of inequality surfaced in a stark manner. And that is why common people started wondering why, despite the grant of freedom, which they were obviously enjoying at the moment, they did not still benefit the way the affluent sections had been profiting from a liberal society. And they thought that perhaps the problem lay in the fact that the common people were denied voting rights, which was a facility that was enjoyed by the affluent sections. And that is why they started clamoring for democratic rights. They started demanding extension of voting rights. And by this time, capitalism has matured sufficiently, so the doyens of capitalism realized that this concession could be well extended to the commoners without any fear of undoing all that capitalism had amassed. And that is exactly why liberal society was democratized. The extension of the democratic element was a later day addition to mainstream liberal theory. And this liberal democratic theory is also considered to be as a welfare state when referred as an economic category. So how did the welfare state emerge? The state basically takes responsibility for providing the minimum subsistence in the economy, for maintaining a basic level of subsistence in the economy, so that people are not denied access to the basic conditions of living that are crucial to human survival. So how did the welfare state emerge? Tracing the evolution of the welfare state in the Western world, La Chapelle records that in the Western Hemisphere, states were established as a means to respond to their population's need for security. Protection of the territory against outside invaders, enforcement of law and order, as well as economic stability were the reasons which gradually magnified the role of the state. In the aftermath of the Second World War, the state strengthened its economic position as well. It supervised and corrected market failures. In true Keynesian fashion, the state endeavored to stabilize the economy, maintain full employment, stimulate growth, ensure price stability, and support external viability. The creation of the welfare state during the first half of the 20th century served to give greater credibility to the central state. But what is important to understand that welfare is basically extended as a response to what the citizens are entitled to. It is not a kind of charity that is dished out by the state. Modern theory of welfare depended on the reinterpretation of certain key political concepts like liberty, equality, and community. This resulted in an alteration in the nature and the conception of society, from a conception of a loosely coordinating set of individuals bound together by common rules but lacking a common end, into a more intimate form of order as depicted by the sense of a community, characterized by a sense of belonging and in recognition of mutual responsibilities among individuals. If people were held together by social bonds that transcended contractual relationships, then they could well make claims on each other. From this perspective, state welfare would cease to be regarded as an act of charity, but it is more a form of entitlement. In understanding the evolution of the welfare state, we realize today that it is an essential institution in modern society because not all categories of the population are equally comfortable or poised to take life on its own terms. In Western Europe, the first basic pillars of social protection emerged around 1900, but the modern welfare state, a term coined in the early 1940s, developed from the 1950s to the 1970s. Social protection was extended to a broader range of social risks and services. Coverage was widened to most of the population, and compensation levels came to reach well above subsistence level. As a consequence, tax extraction reached between 1/3 and 1/2 of the economy, occasionally more. Since the 1980s, welfare states have continued to expand, but typically without raising the level of taxation. We find welfare states emerging in recently industrialized countries as well. They have developed in former communist countries also, following the transition to the market economy. Among the significant newcomers, mention must be made of China, which started developing as a modern welfare state since the 1990s. Taking a broad view, the welfare state intrinsically linked to market economy and industrialism, as claimed by functional writers more than 50 years ago. However, different welfare models or welfare regimes can be traced back to the formative period. Since the 1980s or 1990s, most welfare states have been undergoing significant restructuring, recalibration, and even transformation, but this has not eliminated differences among them, or what is commonly referred to as regime differences. With this idea of welfare state in mind, where the state undertakes to maintain a definite subsistence level in the economy and tries to offer as much of facilities to those sections of the population which are by and large deprived or hapless. In this context, let us see if we can approximate a definition of the welfare state. A welfare state is a state in which organized power is deliberately used through politics and administration, an effort to modify the play of market forces at least in 3 directions. First, by guaranteeing individuals and families a minimum income irrespective of the market value of their work or their property. That is why we insist on maintaining a subsistence level in the economy, which is the sine qua non of a welfare state. Second, by narrowing the extent of insecurity, by enabling individuals and families to meet certain social contingencies, for example, sickness, old age, and unemployment, which lead otherwise to individual and family crisis. And we know that in today's world, there are so many kinds of threats staring us in the face, staring various sections of the population in their faces, like food insecurity, water insecurity, or even energy insecurity. Third, by ensuring that all citizens without distinction of status or class are offered the best standards available in relation to a certain agreed range of social services. In short, the welfare state modifies the impact of the market by providing some sort of minimum guarantee which will mitigate poverty entering into their lives, and covering a range of social risks and providing certain services like health care, child care, elder care, etc. at the best standards available. Therefore, welfare states differ as regards the level of ambition and the mix between these aspects. Coverage may include a broad or a narrow range of risks and services, and minima may alleviate poverty or aim at providing equality. So, what is a welfare state? A welfare state represents a concept of government in which the state plays a key role in the protection and promotion of economic and social well-being of the citizens. So what is to be highlighted is that the government or representing the state or acting as the state has a lead role to play so far as lives of several sections of the population are concerned. A welfare state is based on the principles of equality of opportunity and equitable distribution of wealth. It also focuses on governmental responsibility for those who are unable to avail themselves of the minimum provisions of a good life. And under this system, the welfare of its citizens is the responsibility of the state. Now, we know that with the advent of liberalization and globalization, and these are all euphemistic expressions which celebrate the high noon of capitalism worldwide, celebrating, you can say, the ascendancy of global capitalism, one wonders, does it really mean that the state is withdrawing from all its traditional domains of responsibility? Does it mean that the state is shrinking, giving more and more space to private players? It is commonplace to talk in the post-Cold War world in terms of the North-South divide. But globalization does not operate over a level playing field. Although globalization unleashes opportunities to players across the world, we must understand that not everybody is equally poised to take advantage of the opportunities offered by globalization. So the distinction that so long prevailed between the industrialized, affluent Northern Hemisphere and the deindustrialized, impoverished Southern Hemisphere, that sounds a rather of an oversimplification in today's world, because even within each hemisphere, in fact even within each country, the picture has got a lot more complicated, and we can see various layers of population ranging from the very affluent to the rather poor in every country, in every corner of the world. Clearly, there are losers and winners that globalization has thrown up. In fact, one of the characteristics of contemporary globalization is that it unfolds in a post-socialist framework. In fact, there are several scholars like Joseph Stiglitz in his book Globalization and Its Discontents. He draws attention to the fact that there are several segments of the population who are emerged as the losers because they cannot take advantage of the opportunities offered by globalization. And therefore, the state has to take up some action in their favor so that they can gain a foothold in this otherwise unsure and uncertain world. Globalization that we are witnessing today and the kind that was set in motion earlier gives contemporary globalization a special and at times a sharp edge. The earlier integration of the world economy was driven more by technological changes in transport and communication rather than by policy changes. What we are trying to say is simply this, that globalization or liberalization unfolding across the world is not a new development. But even say that even Alexander the Great, in extending the frontiers of the Macedonian Empire, was in fact manifesting an attempt at globalization. But what we are trying to understand here now is that globalization today is happening in a post-socialist world when capitalism has become ascendant worldwide. And not only that, it is a phenomenon which is driven not merely by technological changes, but also by policy changes. So the state steps in a major way as an usherer of globalization, and it must also respond to globalization as a manager of globalization. So that is why the role of the state is an important facet in today's globalization, in as much as we find that countries across the world that want to set sail to the winds of globalization need to synchronize and tune their policies in keeping with global currents and norms enunciated at the global level. And alongside that, it has to recognize who are the losers in their particular territories, and the state or the government will have to take ameliorative measures to address their poverty and poverty-inducing conditions. The role of the state in today's globalization is therefore evident. Today's most dramatic changes is the degree to which governments have intervened to reduce obstacles to the flow of trade and investments worldwide. And in that sense, I say that today's states are usherers of globalization. The story of globalization today must be written in two inks, as Jagdish Bhagwati said, one colored by technical change and the other by state action. Globalization is therefore transforming, but not in any way burying or eclipsing the Westphalian model of the sovereign state. It is producing the disaggregated state. The state is therefore to be viewed as a manager of globalization because the state alone knows who are the winners and who are the losers within any particular territory. And that is why it will be the state's responsibility to try and cater to capacity building of those sections of the population who are unable to take advantage of the opportunities unleashed by globalization. This is all the more evident with reference to particular cases, and what better case than India herself. The term development as conceptualized in the Indian economy is problematic. It places more emphasis on the financial rather than the human aspect of development. The globalization-led development and consequent displacement is creating poverty at a faster rate than is alleviating it. The current policies of development are biased towards infrastructure rather than services, towards big cities rather than small cities, and rural settlements towards already developed areas rather than backward areas. And finally, these policies are privileging the richer communities and the affluent sections and dispossessing the poor from their rights to land and other basic services. And that is why, in the interest of these sections of the population, who I keep referring to as the losers in contemporary liberalization or globalization, who need to be looked after by the state. Thus, the gap between the haves and the have-nots is continuously growing, and an increasing proportion of the population is continuously moving down the poverty line. What we are facing is definitely a new global order. In the process of new global order development, the gaps between the rural and the urban, as well as the rich and the poor, are increasing. Development programs are more oriented to the time-bound specific projects funded by external agencies like World Bank and the DFID, and these we know are not really neutral agencies trying to cater to development without rhyme or reason. Continuous development activities are non-existent, thus raising the question of equity. The distribution of resources and services are skewed in nature, pushing marginal communities towards the periphery of power and development. However, one positive aspect of Indian democracy has of course emerged in recent years, and I will also refer to the Forest Rights Act in this connection at a later point of time, that the protection of rights of the citizens in different spheres of life, starting from the right to information and education, to work and food, these are definitely encouraging developments. Therefore, the need for the state's intervention in the interest of equity and for the sake of protecting the environment can hardly be exaggerated. In these hyperactivities of growth and development, there emerges a crisis of equity and environment. The increasing population is placing greater demands on finite resources of the earth and consequently impacting the environment, making the future of the earth unsustainable. That is why it has become so common to talk in terms of sustainable development. In the process of development, both the physical and cultural landscapes are being reshaped. The human intervention on rivers in the name of management for multi-purpose development projects and activities is changing the physical and the cultural landscapes in the river basins, along with adverse impact on the lives of the people who depend on them. To cope with these increasing demands on these resources, the environment is also deteriorating. The globalization-led intervention of multinational companies has changed the nature of resource use and has increased the pre-existing regional inequality and disparity largely. Climate change and natural disasters are occurring at a higher rate, impacting the livelihoods of millions, the majority of whom are poor. And it is in the interest of these that welfarism and the need for it has to be understood. With independence, an interventionist and developmental state in India, for example, was seen as essential for achieving the aims depicted by the directive principles of state policies like removal of poverty, social justice, self-reliance, and growth. The principles formulated also included free and compulsory education, public healthcare systems, higher education systems, economic and social rights of women, concern with the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes, and alleviation of the poverty which often grips them. So for all these reasons, the intervention by the state for the sake of welfare can hardly be exaggerated. In the Indian context in particular, with the inauguration of the liberalizing regime over and above what was conceptualized at the time of the inception of the Indian Constitution, we see that there are many aspects that need to be addressed by the state. But unfortunately, some suspect that the state is in the process of abandoning its earlier role involving high stateness and reconciling itself to a more withdrawn role. As Kothari says, by now it seems clear that the concerns of some intellectuals and journalists with respect to growing democratic pressures and demands, such as better wages and employment opportunities from the laboring and other classes, and the concerns of foreign investors with respect to the same issues, seem to be converging. They are also converging on the need to reduce the role of the state in the affairs of the country and hand over things to market mechanisms and to increase integration in the world market. Some also suspect erosion of the state in India. First, there has been underway an erosion of the legitimacy of the state in the eyes of the people, both in respect of its standing in the eyes of those who for long depended on it for their well-being. Second, there has taken place over the years a gradual erosion of the authority vis-a-vis the aura and the oeuvre with which the state was looked up to, both by the citizens at large and in respect of authority of the center by intermediate and local units and institutions. And third, there has also taken place an erosion of the whole conception of a distinctive and overriding role of the Indian state, both vis-a-vis other loci of power within the country and vis-a-vis external interests like dominant centers of geostrategic power, international financial institutions, transnational structures of capital and commerce. So is the state really retreating? The state in India, however, is seen to be in some kind of a retreat. This is particularly true in respect of the economic sphere, a trend which has been visible since the 1990s and which trend has intensified in the post-1991 era. But it is also true in the social sphere in matters such as providing opportunities to the minorities, the backward classes, tribal communities, women and children. Since its independence, the issue of poverty within India has remained a vital concern. To address these and all related issues, definitely it is time to understand that the state will have a nuanced role to play. It is time to consider the emergence of a new world, as Kothari says, that in the light of the growing tendency, both politico, economic and ideological, of integrating the whole world in the framework of world capitalism and Western hegemony, we have to think about the likely future of the nation state in India and in so many countries across the world. One has to consider a nuanced role of the state, and Kothari draws attention to three particular trends in this respect. First, he says there is a marked rise of subnational consciousness, overtaking the earlier kind of nationalism that included diverse regional and cultural identities. Second, the growing accent on technology as the pathway of development has necessarily led to the moving away from self-reliance towards dependence on external forces. And third, there has been the rise of new organizational forms that are transcending states and nations. Under the circumstances, the responsibility of the state can hardly be ignored. Kothari comments that it is only by enhancing the capacities of the people and the capabilities of the people in terms of their levels of education, health, and a non-hazardous environment and sanitation that the poor can actually feel and become empowered to carve out an economic future for them. In other words, the point which I have earlier made, that there is extreme need for the state to cater to capacity building of the people so that they can take advantages of the opportunities that are unleashed by a globalizing world. With the onset of liberalization, the government of India has taken several steps in that direction, like, say, for instance, providing midday meals, providing the Jawahar Yojana, the Rozgar Yojana, the public distribution system has been revamped. So all these measures on part of the state reaffirm the welfare commitment of the Indian state in an age of globalization as much as earlier. So we see a remarkable continuity of the role of the state in most parts of the world, including India, so far as commitment to welfareism is concerned. There are scholars, in fact, who see a remarkable continuity in this regard. For instance, Nair observes that it is evident there has been no withering away or shrinking of the state, either subsequent to or as a consequence of liberalization. Rather, there has been a persistent expansion of the state, and this is corroborated by different measures of the government, like the NREGA, the Job Guarantee Scheme, which tries to address the conditions of poverty of the rural people. But alongside these, there is also the need for institutional changes, which we see in case of the Forest Rights Act. The need for this act was articulated by various sections of the population, NGOs, who were conscious of the deprivation of the Adivasis and who believed that they were entitled to the land that they have been inhabiting for generations. But such measures on part of the government will need to be corroborated by granular changes made at the level of the ground so that all these policy changes of the government can see the light of day when it comes to reality. So the success of welfare measures in India ultimately depends on not only government action, but also on part of the general public, which in turn can be particularly important in promoting the positive functions of the government, such as the provision of public services in terms of social security, healthcare, child immunization, primary education, and rural infrastructure. Through such measures and through vigilance on part of the public opinion, it is possible that welfarism in all parts of the world will become a reality, because it would be utopian to assume that liberalization will unfold in a playing field where everyone is equally poised to take advantage of the opportunities offered by globalization. Thank you.